Please join me in the spirit of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I missed my chance to welcome you, so welcome. Hybrid worship is hybrid worship. It's a little more complicated than when we do it one way or another, so we appreciate your patience. And there are people watching us online. We have 25 people joining us, so I'm going to say thank you to them for their patience. We moved them around 3 times this morning, but now we are all in the same spot, I think. And we're squealing a little bit. We'll figure it out. Oh, it's hearing aids. It's all right. It's what it means to be in community. We haven't done that for a while, have we? Right? It's all those sounds we used to know, and we don't know them anymore. I do have something to say. It's not very long. So I'm going to stand here and just, vamp for a few minutes. No, I'm just kidding. You might wish I was back on sabbatical. I don't know. All right, so this is what I got from Snarky Jesus this morning. The phrase that stuck out to me was, who do you say that I am? This is a pivot point in the gospel narrative. Jesus is traveling with the disciples. There's all kinds of significance about where he is when he does this. If you're into that, you can go look it up. But he asks the disciples, who do people say that I am? And basically they give safe, standard answers that they've heard other people say. Jesus, you're John the Baptist. Others say you're Elijah. Others say you're a prophet. And then Jesus turns the question and asks, who do you say that I am? And Peter, now remember, Peter has all kinds of significance throughout the Gospels, right? Peter's the person who denies Jesus even when he says he won't deny Jesus. He's the rock, the cornerstone that the church will be built on. So Peter, they're all important, but Peter's pretty important. Peter makes a choice. He doesn't give those same answers. Do you remember what Peter says? Peter says, you are the Messiah. You are the Christ. And it's important to remember, like sometimes we'll say Jesus Christ, right? But Christ is a title. So this is the first time that title is being used. It's a shift. Peter's making a choice to shift how Jesus is understood. And this is what commentator Matthew Skinner, also from Working Preacher, says about Peter's answer. He says, quote, Peter's claim, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah, makes an astounding statement. This is really interesting. So far, Jesus hasn't done anything that looks particularly Christ-like. The few intertestamental Jewish texts that mention the Christ, so they know what they're looking for, paint a very different picture than what they've seen of Jesus. So that means Peter's comment is anticipatory. Peter can't be saying, the stuff you're doing, Jesus, reminds me of those obscure references we find in some writings about a uniquely anointed, divinely authorized deliverer, because he hasn't done any of that yet. So by calling Jesus the Christ at this point in the story, Peter declares, I think you're the one who will purify our society, reestablish Israel's supremacy among the nations, and usher in a new era of peace and holiness. I'm expecting big things from you. That's the end of Matthew Skinner's commentary. And this is where the proverbial shit hits the fan, right? they start fighting with each other, because what Peter thinks the Messiah will do and look like is not what Jesus then goes on to describe the Messiah as doing. And so Peter takes him aside and rebukes him, and instead of Peter getting Jesus back on track, like imagine that scene. No, you have it all wrong. I know that you're the Christ, you're the Messiah, but what you just said is not how this works, right? Peter has a very distinct expectation about what will happen. So, last year at this time, we were only able to worship with one another online. We were growing weary of a 6-month pandemic that was about to surge, and we were waiting things out. If I had asked you, what do you say the church is, you likely would have told me what the church used to be, what we were expecting to return to, what we were hoping to return to. An answer based on something you had already experienced. Kind of like when they said, Jesus, you're John the Baptist, you're Elijah, you're a prophet. Those are all things that have already been experienced. But now, we're 18 months into the pandemic. Throughout that time, we've had the full roller coaster. We've had the glimmers of hope, the sense that it would go back, and then we've had the gut-wrenching reality. And while we're able to gather on Sunday mornings, and it is so good to gather, we are not back to business as usual or church as usual. And in fact, we may never be back to church as usual. Now remember, usual is just what we've known. So imagine a moment, this scene. Jesus comes to us here in Yarmouth. And we ask Jesus, who do you think that we are? And he responds, you are the church. All right, Jesus. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to be the church? Just like when Peter said, you are the Christ, it's a pivot moment for us. And we have to take a cue and forgive ourselves a little bit. Because here's Peter and Jesus saying shut up to each other back and forth, right? It's kind of upsetting when it's not what you think it's going to be. But we have to take a cue and look and see what might be possible that we don't yet understand. That is not what we are holding on to, but what God is holding on to for us. It's our time to recognize that being the church is an aspirational answer at this time in history. We can't be the church that came before. We have to pivot. And so we are the church that will emerge as we listen faithfully to God. It's an exercise in essentials and imagination, a visionary quest that requires us to consider again, and we do this over and over here. Edgar Beam is my favorite critic. He says, didn't we already do this? We already did this, but we have to keep doing it. What matters most? You have to keep coming back to what matters most instead of what used to matter. Those are two different things. We have to ground ourselves in what matters most. And it's a quest that will at times make us uncomfortable, but a quest that invites us into deeper relationship with God and new possibilities for shaping and engaging the world around us. Amen.